We're gonna we're gonna start with a fairly open-ended question. The theme of this year's EF Week is freelancers and collaboration. We've already been talking about it in the introduction, so this is a completely sort of open kind of a question. Everybody's on mute except me, and so here's what I'm going to ask you. If you want to answer this question, take yourself off mute, and I'll call you. Let's see if that works. First question, tell me, what do you think about freelancers collaboration as a theme in general? What are your thoughts? Go, Hector.
Well, I mean, coming from a freelancer background, I mean, I started my career in a tiny little island called Cyprus in Europe, pretty notorious over the last few years. But when I started out, there was no freelancing movement, there was no collective, there was no nothing. And it was a very isolated experience. I thought that I was doing something wrong. I didn't know what I was doing. And I longed for some sort of community to exist. So I think that now that we're sort of having these conversations, it's going to open up this way of life for a lot of people who wouldn't have normally done it if there wasn't this collaborative force of people being able to work alone, but work with other people. And I think co-working is actually a big driver of that. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
No, that's a great leader, because co-working is a big driver of that. Brian, tell me what's your experience with co-working being a big driver of that. Unmute yourself. That's my trick. There you go.
So I think this kind of goes back to what I mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of positives to freelancing, both from a freelancer perspective and also from a customer perspective. Location and cost. I think cost is a big factor for both parties. What we find with co-working, and one of our main selling points with co-working, especially in a more regional environment, is that social element. So we find we're working from home. So they might be not working on a cliched kitchen table, but they were very much isolated from a community in that environment. And humans we're community-based people. We thrive on community, and I think where co-working definitely facilitates freelancing is around that socializing with other people, and with co-work and in other co-working environments in Ireland, that is the main benefit that customers see from working in that space. I think when you look at Ireland and co-working, one of the things that is very important here is we have a bit of an unbalance between supply and demand. So supply and demand of houses in particular in the urban environments. And so there is a push and a pull towards regional locations. And I see, and a number of my peers also see, co-working as key in facilitating the accommodation of that business development outside of those urban environments.
Yeah, I think that's true. My own co-working space is in a town of 50,000. One of the co-working spaces in our network is in a village of 3,000 people, and it might be 3,001 if Mrs. Janssen has had her baby. I mean, it's really that small. And we also have locations in Amsterdam. One of the things I noticed, tell me if you see the same thing, that community, when we talk about community, we're talking about a different thing in an urban setting and in a smaller rural or near rural setting. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, so I've worked in, as I mentioned, I worked out of workspaces in Dublin and Cork as well, and there I think the collaboration aspect is very powerful, because simply you have more people, so you have more people, freelancers in the location, and so you have more diversity in the skills of the freelancers working in the workspaces. So, for example, if you're looking to get a platform developed, then you have front-end developers, back-end developers. You might have someone helping you with a presentation. You might have product managers, and they're all in that space. That collaboration element is very powerful. But generally, they're all in one location in the urban environments, I have found. When you're looking towards the regions or regional nations, you might be working across different workspaces. So, for example, for those who are familiar with Ireland, we have people here who have freelancers in Cork City, freelancers in towns in Cork, but also freelancers in Limerick, so other counties. So you're still working across different co-working spaces, but people are more distributed geographically.
Yeah, I think that's true. Sarah, I think all the co-working people are like professionals. We all talk about community all day long because it's one of our 5 values. But it's my understanding that Smart actually is also interested in community and connecting its freelancers. Is that your experience? I need you to unmute yourself. That's my trick. It's my trick to leave the mute on.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. So we have different ways of connecting the members and make them collaborate or facilitate the collaboration, let's say, between the freelancers of our community, of our co-op. We have working spaces that can be like co-working as in longer term rental, but we try to mix people from different sectors of activities so that they can really enlarge their network. But we also have tools or we have that allow them to work collectively together in a flexible way. What we see is that freelancers often do, in our community at least, often do work with others, but it's for specific projects. It will be limited in time, even though they can eventually regularly work together. And I think that we really need to enable that, for people to work together at one moment, then be alone, and then or with another group. And this is what we propose to our members with our activity tool. And also, because we became a cooperative quite recently, we've been existing for 20 years, but we only started the process of becoming a co-op about 3-4 years ago. For us now, it's even more important than it was before to really get the community of our members to really connect and have moments where they can also decide on and shaping this cooperative. We have working groups and they can think of how it should function. How could we improve our tools? Should we set up a ethic committee? Do we have working groups we want to focus on? And also the next step for us now is really to help our members support themselves in their profession or their sectors of activity. I mean, we have over 25,000 people on a yearly basis who use our services. We have transversal services, but we realize that we really have to help them in working collectively together and self-structure themselves. So we can kind of be a hub for freelancers to create their own collectives or co-ops that they can shape at their own model, so they can also be stronger on the market, but also as persons, as they can exchange, do peer learning, and develop their own collective business that can make them more powerful than if they are alone.
Well, that's excellent. So you're finding that, are you finding, because it's recent, we're looking at the co-op model as well at the European Co-working Assembly level, and a lot of co-working spaces are going to the platform co-op. Are you finding that it, as a structure, actually supports collaboration just by itself, or does it require a lot of work?
It requires a lot of work. I mean, you can lay it down on paper and say that you do, and you can actually do it. But if you really want it to be a collaborative co-op, you really have to make this community work together. You have to really organize that. It just doesn't happen because you're a co-op. You have to design your statutes very well, and you especially have to put content and drive the activities of the members with the members.
That's great. Thanks a bunch. So Lauren, I'm going to ask you now, because you probably, you may not know this, but Uber actually doesn't have a worldwide name for fostering collaboration. But I think you have something to say about that, don't you?
Absolutely. And I think since Uber has emerged also in Europe, where I think we have to make the differentiation first, that in Europe we have moved to a model where we work with professionally licensed independent drivers. And what we have seen is that obviously, given that some of the drivers have been full-time professional drivers before, they already had some type of association and they collaborated. Then we also have drivers who became professional drivers coming from other careers. And with these, we wanted to build something more collaborative. Obviously, they have their WhatsApp group. So I recently spoke to a female Uber driver in Paris who told me that they have a female-only WhatsApp group where they basically keep each other informed, where they talk about issues that they're facing. So very interesting. But I think also from the driver side, what we heard is that they wanted something more, I wouldn't say something more permanent, because we organize roundtables. We organize sometimes expos in the UK, for example, where we have a big event where partner drivers can come and basically talk about airport issues, talk about other issues, talk about accounting, all these things. But they wanted, that's the feedback that we got, they wanted something more permanent, what I said. And we recently launched, actually not recently, sorry, going on for several months, we launched a program called Uber Engage, which is only a pilot because we want to make sure that it actually works and that everyone is satisfied, in which we kind of bring together 5 drivers in each UK city where we operate, and these have official office hours in order to collect feedback from partner drivers directly or anonymously, and this will be then discussed with Uber staff when it comes to changes to the GPS change, like fixing bugs, or when it comes to introducing new features. That's something that we really value, because at the end of the day, we see drivers as our customers, and given that they're independent and that they have other forms of or income streams, we have to ensure that they want to use our app, and we do that if we actually can address the challenges that they're facing. This can be social protection, this can be access to skills improvement opportunities. As I said before, we have quite a few that actually, so we know that drivers had other careers, that they have been freelancing or they came from employed jobs, and they would like to move to another career maybe, and this is why we're trying to kind of get that feedback from them to understand which kind of skills improvement opportunities they would benefit from.
Thanks. That's really, it's really interesting because everybody is talking about collaboration among freelancers, and collaboration among freelancers is really important. I think everybody here can agree, and if you ask any freelancer, they'll all say, yes, that collaboration is really important. We need to get together. And yet, there are some, there seems to be something that stops people from doing it because, as Sarah says, it's hard work. I know in the co-working community, we're always thinking of ways, how can we get people together so that they'll start collaborating? One of the points that comes up is trust. What do you think it is that makes it difficult for freelancers to collaborate? Marco.
Well, as I work with governments, I think the policies sometimes are a bit of a block when it comes to improving freelancers' cooperation. I'm quite excited about the trend towards flash teams, where the companies are putting together people, external talent pool of independent workers to solve complex challenges. And this has been done also by co-working spaces in the past. And one of the idea why these teams are being put together is to apply for public procurement. Actually, joint public procurement is still very far in sight of European policymakers. They still require large capitalization for small companies to participate in the bidding in the procurement sector, and these freelancers are usually being left out. So the genius idea was to put together many independent professionals and create a sort of company so they can go after larger projects, and if these larger projects are run by governmental agency, let them be. So it's all in all rather exciting. What I think that, what we're doing from European Forum of Independent Professionals is that I think policymakers should not take a blanket approach when it comes to policy, because all independent professionals are different from each other. So we need policies that legitimize, professionalize, and support the advantaged segments, but at the same time protect the vulnerable segment. And what is very hot at the moment is actually clearly set out the difference between false and genuine, so that the former can be avoided. We want freelancers to be defined. Actually, that's the starting point of the whole discussion. So we need freelancers to be defined as a unique subset of micro enterprise for the purpose of the European SME definition, and basically just recognize them as economic agents in their own right, providing a very different function than employees and business owners. So it's all about creating simplified policy. for freelancers with impact assessment adapted to self-employment, with thresholds or exemptions as applicable, and basically the right incentives for people to remain, to become and remain self-employed, and for the companies to engage them. So in the end, it's a policy environment that promotes a wide variety of contractual arrangements as a way to increase labor market participation and inclusion.
Great. I see Sarah. Sarah has something to say. Go,
I have
Sarah.
a question.
Oh, okay. Ask your question.
On what you were saying, Marco, that we need to define the freelancers. And I think this is a very important question. And this is a good place to ask it because, for example, in hearing the research by Maut, I see the same issue that we've had in a consortia. We had we were in a consortia to do a research on independent professionals in Europe. We did it with researchers. We were just one of the partners. And one of the biggest difficulty was to say, what are we talking about? When we say freelancers, do we say self-employed? Because in this whole discussion, we've been jumping from one to another without specifying. For us, for example, self-employed, I mean, freelancer is not necessarily a self-employed. And either you're talking in economic terms, in sociological terms, or in legal terms. It's not the same thing. So question is, what do we mean here on by freelancers, or at least in the Maut research?
Yeah, I would go as far as to say, Sarah, that your point is even more important in consideration of governmental statistics. How do we count this demographic? Yes, who they are, but how do we quantify them? What are the numbers? I can tell you what our definition is, and then Shiraz probably will tell you their definition. I think, yes, that freelancers are all self-employed, but they are a well-educated and highly skilled self-employed workers without employees nor employers. So there are people that offer specialized skills and of a knowledge-based nature, and work in a variety of bases of creative, managerial, scientific, usually in business to business. So this is our definition. That's what we are trying to push.
And yes, on our part, the definition is more or less the same. It's freelancers are high qualified, self-employed workers. So they can be consultants, graphic designers, web developers, but usually they don't have any, asset, tangible asset, and they don't have a license, for example, like a taxi driver. That's the main definition we take.
Because if you see, it's also very complex when you're talking about different countries. Because in France, for example, there's this status of the salarié entrepreneur, so salaried entrepreneur.
Yeah.
For me, these are freelancers. They only decided a more protective legal status given the situation. And our members are salaried because it's what they chose. This is what the model proposes, but they're freelancers. And what we see is that some of them have a main job that is, let's say, highly skilled sector or type of profession, but they also have low-skilled jobs, like you also, or jobs that don't necessarily needs high skills. Like some can be artists and also drive for a platform that delivers food on a bike. So for us, it's tricky. It's a very tricky topic.
It's true that, yeah, you can definitely have freelancers who are employed, like with the portage and all those mechanisms. But yeah, so on Maut, for example, we have both. Like we have a mix of freelancers who are completely self-employed and freelancers who are considered to be employees. But yeah, for the research, we were quite conservative, and that's the definition we took.
Yeah, it's always the question, is a plumber highly skilled or not? If you ask me, I think plumbers are extremely highly skilled. I couldn't do the work of a plumber, for example.
My plumber is extremely highly skilled. I don't know about yours.
I mean, we are relying in Europe to something very outdated, which is the European qualification framework. And in there, you have you have a way to find out who's highly skilled and who's not. But the problem is that it always relies on diploma, on qualifications, and less on training and practical experience. So we're going back to the plumber. The plumber may not have a diploma, but may have a lot of practical experience and training. So yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating question. Who's a freelancer? How to define them?
If I may just throw in something, and that's also maybe something that we could discuss, and I would like to get your guys' input in. Basically, why do we want to define what a freelancer is? I think we want to define it because we want to understand what critical mass the European Union is talking about in order to strengthen the need for action, regulatory action, maybe more support. I think in the second step, it is more important. It's not so important who is a freelancer, but let's look, what are these people? What do these people have in common? So a plumber faces the same difficulties with access to social protection systems and maybe an architect. It's difficult sometimes because for high-level income independent workers, obviously they have set up their own programs, so that's leaving that aside. But I think when it comes to addressing the challenges that independent workers, freelancers are facing, I think this is where we can actually identify common challenges. But I do understand that in order to make the case that something needs to be done, we first need to define this critical mass, to shed light or to tell policymakers that this is something that we need to address. I don't know what others think.
Anybody have specific thoughts on that? So
yeah, sure.
Go.
So obviously, with the structure that our company has, is we kind of support different types of what we call entrepreneurial communities. And instead of sort of quantifying or qualifying what kind of entrepreneur someone is, or kind of if they're a freelancer, a startup, a founder, a consultant, we kind of think of every sort of entity as an entrepreneurial entity. And that's how we look at it. So it's the size of the entrepreneurial entity, whether you are driving for Uber, delivering food for Deliveroo, or selling your services as a consultant. We kind of like look at it as anything or anyone who forges skills, time, and assets into a solution they can provide to the community. That's what we classify as a entrepreneurial entity. And we kind of just look at that on the macro scale. So we operate across 50-something countries now. We found that the legal definitions were different in every single country. We realized that the cultural, I didn't grow up, but I started my career in Cyprus, and it was frowned upon to call yourself an entrepreneur for a very long time. I didn't even know the word freelancer until I moved to the UK. But it was because of that, because of the way I grew up and because of the different countries we work in, we don't call people freelancers. We support freelancing communities and platforms and gig economy platforms, but we like to think of the actors or the entities as entrepreneurial entities, as opposed to what do we define them as. The less time we spent on what do we define people as, the more we could focus on how do we support their end goals. And that's kind of that's my 2 cents on how we approach the definition question.
All right, so it's sort of a results-oriented kind of a definition. I like that. I think, yeah, it's a way. So being a freelancer is a way of solving a problem.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got their own motivations. They've got their own challenges. We like to focus on what their challenges are so that they can get to their motivations, as opposed to why and what entity they are and how they identify.
I think another interesting thing as well is that there's a lot of full-time salaried workers who are doing freelance work on the side. So they might not necessarily self-identify as freelancers or see themselves as freelancers, but in fact they are. And they may have social protections or income security based on their full-time job. And if they had more of that in the freelancing side of things, well, then they might devote more of their time to that or switch full-time to freelancing.
So I meant to ask you that because of your experience at Toptal. That is certainly in my own co-working space and the co-working spaces in the European Co-working Assembly. I'm willing to bet, if I just did a sort of rough back of the envelope estimate, that a third of my co-workers are people who have a full-time job, and they have a side gig They have a dream. Some of them have a dream. I have 3 who did what we call graduating. That is to say, their side gig grew enough that they then quit their full-time job, and that was their intention. Some people, that's not their intention. Some people, their intention is to have a job and a side gig. Shiraz, is that what you're seeing at Malt as well?
Yes, actually, at Malt we have I think I would say like maybe 20% of people registered on Malt who also are full-time employees. And on the survey we did, actually, we also have, I think it's less. I'm just going to check the numbers, not to tell you, not to be mistaken, but I think we have around, on average, on average, it's 75% of the people who are full-time freelancers. So 25 are not, and have another job on the side. So yeah, it's getting more and more common, and I think we also see some discrepancies between countries. Once again, it's a bit maybe cliche, but I think it depends on the maturity of the markets on freelancing, and also on the perks, to say so, like the policy, the local policy, if it favors freelancing or not. And so in France, there is a bit more people who are full-time freelancers than in Spain. Once again, the market I know best. So yeah, we kind of see this mix, and I agree with Brian that indeed, if we gave the same advantages to freelancers, then there would be more full-time freelancers, definitely.